Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very, very honored and excited to be interviewing a very, very special space champion, Mr. Charles Slatkin. Charles is the founder of the Robert Goddard Project and the Wonder Mission. Part of this project includes the first launch centennial celebration, a unique opportunity to leverage the incredible legacy of Dr. Goddard, the father of modern rocketry, and recognize the achievements of today's scientists, engineers, educators, researchers, and visioneers. I sparked my passion for space through model rocketry and through a middle school rocketry club. And being able to hear about Charles's story through the Beth Munn's podcast, I was immediately like, I have to talk with him about his journey and just share his inspiring story with everyone. Charles is a multimedia and internationally recognized wow factor pioneer and visioneer. Charles has an extensive background with his expertise in science, film, video, audio, and photography. And today he's taken his talents from his professional career and applied them to the Goddard Project, reimagining Goddard's legacy with advanced storytelling technologies to help inspire and motivate a new generation of dreamers and visioneers. So welcome, Charles. Thank you so much for taking your time from your busy schedule to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders. I'm very, very honored to be speaking with you today.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Yes, to just kick off our conversation, I wanted to first start off by asking you about your typical day. I'm just curious, what does your job entail? What are your current roles? You're working on this incredible project. How do you like to generally structure your day?
Well, I wish it had more structure than it does because I'm still sort of a one-man band. We're about to sort of, begin to build a team. We're really kind of launching in earnest just recently. It's taken a number of years to kind of come up with kind of the unifying mission with all these different initiatives and how they all work together. So it varies from day to day. It's interesting. Last couple of days, I've done a lot of interviews. I've been on a bunch of Zoom calls presenting. But normally it starts with me driving by the Goddard house on my way to my studio is right down the street in an old mill building. So I usually drive by the house, check it out, see how things are going. Has the sidewalks been plowed if we have snow? We had a rainstorm the other day, had to do a little water remediation down in the basement. But usually I'll start there, I'll head off to the office, I'll go through my emails. I'll work on I live by a to-do list, which gets longer and
Me too.
longer and longer each day. And a lot of it's really kind of following up and outreach, being a small organization at this point, but actually beginning to really connect with a lot of people around the country. I'm finding it's a lot to keep up from day to day in terms of all these wonderful people that want you to follow up with them and just trying to keep track of what you've promised, delivering. And I'm getting so many referrals from folks about, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so, you need to talk to so-and-so, and a lot of offers of help, but just trying to manage that so, people get a response, in an acceptable period of time. It's nothing worse than people offering to help and then you ghost them, if you're so busy. So I sort of, try to be very, very disciplined, at least, returning people's emails. I'm a dinosaur. I still answer the phone. I still love the phone. But certainly through post-COVID and through Zoom and Teams, I've been able to really connect with this amazing group of like inspirational, hopeful, brilliant people all over the world in ways I never would have had a chance to do without the COVID challenge, but also the opportunities that are brought to all of us, like yourself.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I relate with so many of the things you actually just said right now because prior to starting Ignited Thinkers or while trying to start Ignited Thinkers, I had no idea how to enter the education field in space. I really didn't know anybody in the aerospace industry, but doing these Zoom calls has enabled me to develop an incredible network of incredible mentors that I look up to and collaborators. And I'm sure you're kind of at the same phase as me right now with Ignited Thinkers. And with what you just said, it takes a lot of effort to keep up with everything that's happening. And I'm sure with your breadth of connections and experience, it's even a lot more to keep up with because there's probably so much coming with this project project, so much excitement. It's a lot to kind of focus in on and make sure you're, fulfilling the initial goals you had with the project. And so I'm curious, what was your initial aha moment or inspiration behind founding this Robert Goddard Project and the Wonder Mission? And where do you see this project kind of evolving and going in the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
Cool. Well, I mean, probably my fascination and passion for space really began very early, probably at 4 or 5 years old. There was a television show called Men in Space that was actually technically fairly sophisticated for its time. It was in black and white. Uh, Late 50s, actually, Walt Disney did a space special with Werner von Braun talking about how we'd get to the moon. Um, and certainly in, I think it was 57, it was 1957 with Sputnik. So I was certainly very aware of the first satellite orbiting the Earth and the beginning of the space race. But then also in '64, I living in Brooklyn, New York, I was able to take a bus on weekends. I think I was 11 or 12, and visit the New York World's Fair. And it was at a time where the country was really in terrible shape. There were civil race riots, extreme poverty. The threat of nuclear annihilation during the Cold War was very real. I mean, we were doing duck and cover in school, but you'd go to the World's Fairs that were promoting a future enabled by technology, and it also featured space in a very big way. And I think sort of being able to look into a hopeful future and seeing what people, scientists and engineers and visionaries could create really kind of allowed me to become the hopeful person that I ended up being for a number of years. There's a famous special effects person who did the special effects for 2001, Douglas Trumbull, and he had a whole pavilion there called, I think it was Mission, I forget the exact name, Mission to Moon or Destination Moon. Incredibly immersive experience for his time, very high resolution, but he really kind of made you feel like you were taking a trip to the moon. So that was sort of the start of it. And I always followed a lot of science fiction as a young man. But I became very involved in photography and filmmaking, and that was really one of my passions. I loved science. My father was a physician. I was pre-med at one point, but I really always had this real love of communicating, but love of photography and advanced technology. So that kind of became a little more a career path. And subsequently, I had read about Goddard as a young person. I think I have this book in the back, Giants of Invention, and it features Robert Goddard. And I think I bought it at my school's science fair book festival, and read about Goddard, but really didn't necessarily connect with me. But I ended up attending Clark University in Worcester, Mass, down the street, as an undergraduate student, where Goddard ended up teaching and also doing all his fundamental research. So I subsequently ended up becoming a professor at Clark years later after graduate school. So all of a sudden, I find myself in Worcester, Mass. I find myself as a student at Clark, as he was. He got his PhD at Clark. And then the year I got to Clark, it was the year they opened the Robert Goddard Memorial Library, this incredibly very cool brutalist architecture building. And at the ribbon cutting was Buzz Aldrin, who 2 months later was about to go on Apollo 11 to the moon. His father, who was also an aerospace engineer and was a student of Goddard's and a friend of Goddard's, Ted Kennedy, Werner von Braun, really a bunch of amazing people. And still, it was always kind of like, gee, that's really cool, but I was sort of into my own, how am I going to make a career out of art and photography and film, etc. But I ended up starting a production company after graduate school. We did a lot of documentary work. We worked for PBS and Discovery Channel, and we actually started to work on a documentary on Goddard way back there. But life got in the way. Corporate clients were we're paying the bills. So I sort of became, a little more involved in the corporate world. But as my career began to uh, to wane, when I was sort of looking ahead to what am I going to do with these next 10 or 20 orbits that I have ahead of me, um, uh, I was becoming more and more discouraged by seeing so many young people and old people seemingly disconnected from all the wonders and achievements and breakthroughs all around them. People could be very feeling negative, and there's no appreciation necessarily of, science was even under attack in recent years. And then I started to read how the United States was 36th in the world in graduating science majors, which blew my
Yeah.
mind. How did that happen? And China was surpassing us in artificial intelligence research and R&D funding. And I've always attended science museums all my life since I was even if I had 20 minutes, I'd pay the full admission and run through a science museum or a space center museum, etc. And I was also a little discouraged with the exhibits I was seeing that were meant to inspire young kids. And I was sort of looking at them with my, with my career talents and saying, that's really not good enough. If you're going to really ignite someone's curiosity and passion, you really have to wow them. And wowing them is just exceeding expectations. So rather than becoming one of those curmudgeons that, goes around and criticizes everything and, oh, that sucks and that's terrible and I could have done better, I really, about 3 or 4 years ago, really started to put pen to paper about, okay, put up or shut up, what would I do? And so I came up with a series of immersive environment renderings using pretty much relatively doable technology, not too cutting edge, not something that's so far ahead that's not going to be done. And I started to share that with friends and colleagues and some of my few aerospace connections at that point. And everyone was really incredibly effusive and encouraging to the point of, you have to do this. So I really started to phase out of all my corporate work and really devote my time to, in terms of creating this mission, which really is to bring the universe to Main Street, but ultimately to wow people, because young people and old, and older people. I mean, we're naturally curious. We have this innate desire to explore, etc. But you need a spark. You need some little, and sometimes it can be very insignificant, but you need a spark to kind of get you to the next level. Um, so as I started to develop these, very ambitious, fairly expensive, immersive environments, um, I was also thinking about Goddard. And all of a sudden, as I started to put my history together with Clark and do a little more reading on the side, I started to realize he was this really great American hero, who kind of um, encapsulated all the values that are so important for progress. He was incredibly patient, and he persevered against all odds with often minimal resources. He only had a couple assistants for most of his career, and he was mocked and made fun of famously by the New York Times in his most early publishings. Even before he was doing rocket research, the New York Times lambasted him I think the quote was something like, Dr. Goddard, despite his chair in physics at Clark University, doesn't understand the most basic principles of, of physics, in that you can't have propulsion in a vacuum. and and he really took a lot of flack for that, and people started to call him, Moon Man, and uh, he didn't know what he was doing, and he became very private and very secretive. And that's actually one of the criticisms, you'll find in reading about Goddard, was he really didn't collaborate the way he might have, and his fame and his career might have, certainly taken a different path. Um, but it was very, very inspiring. The New York Times eventually, 2 days before Buzz and Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, they printed this tiny little retraction that we regret this era. But as I started to delve deeper, this is very common. The Wright brothers, when they first got off the ground, they were really mocked. The United States paid no attention to them for almost 4 years until they started doing exhibitions in France. Um, So I started to, look at the Goddard story. Gee, here's this guy who persevered despite all these obstacles. He's sort of not really well known. I ask people all the time as I travel the country, who Robert Goddard is? Totally clueless. And yet, the Webb telescope that's sending back images from way out there and redefining our knowledge of the universe was constructed at NASA's premier facility that they named the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. So he's revered in the aerospace community, but he's not well known. And all kids know the Wright brothers and Thomas Edison and Samuel Morse, etc. But here's this guy who really ushered in the space age, took a lot of flack, and is still unknown. So it's kind of a great story to rediscover. So I had this first interest was to create these really cool immersive environments that I think could raise the bar in terms of how we connect with this younger generation. But then the Goddard story started to, interest me and realize, gee, that's a great way to package, package this coming of age story. Um, and then I had been on a road trip. I took a road trip a couple years ago for the Artemis moon launch. I fortunately received a VIP pass from I think it was I always forget it was Lockheed Martin, I think, to go down to Kennedy Center. And on the way down, I stopped off at the Goddard Space Flight Center and the Air and Space Museum and NASA's Wallops Island, um, and met a lot of interesting people along the way. But I stopped at Kitty Hawk on the way back, and I was very impressed with what they had done at Kitty Hawk. And then I started reading about their centennial. So in 2003, it was the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight, and they had tens of thousands of people show up. President of the United States spoke. They had flight recreations, and I found this official program on eBay recently, but they called it the event of the century. And I was, starting to read about how many events they had and how many people they had and how organized it was. And I stopped and said to myself, well, gee, that's great. The Wright brothers, they helped humanity get off the ground. But here's Robert Goddard. He helped humanity get off the planet, and especially all the people that carried the torch past him. NASA is still using some of his patents. And I came up with this new reimagining of what the centennial should be, that as much as it's wonderful to celebrate Goddard and his achievements and make him better known, now more than ever, let's celebrate all the modern day Goddards. Let's celebrate all the scientists and engineers that work tirelessly behind the scenes doing research, and sometimes very unsung, sometimes unsuccessfully. But let's make it their day. Let's make it a day to appreciate educators, especially STEM educators. Goddard had three different teachers during his career that really took him under their wing and really kind of allowed him to flourish. But let's make it a celebration of those folks. I mean, you look at the photographs of the young people who are landing, flying a helicopter on Mars without atmosphere, or the folks that after years and years of research developed a vaccine in a year. But let's make it a celebration of all those people at the same time. So let's celebrate dreamers and visionaries and people that that have wonderful inspirational goals. And that's really kind of what's taken sort of gone viral a little bit in my life, where as I talk with people about that, one of my goals is sort of like the Paul Revere of the centennial. The centennial's coming. I think it's 794 days from today, which seems like a long time. But when the Wright brothers had their centennial, the Air and Space Museum kicked it off a year in advance, with Neil Armstrong speaking. But the centennial kind of is this wonderful concept that I'm hoping to create a movement, not only to celebrate it locally, regionally, in Worcester, Mass, and Massachusetts, but also give people around the country a sense of how they could leverage a centennial opportunity for their own unique and creative advantage. So ideally, every science museum should be celebrating the centennial and science and scientists and engineers. And every school program should maybe have a project-based learning module, not only on Goddard, but in terms of, gee, we went from the Wright brothers in 1903 to Goddard in first rocket, liquid rocket in 1926. And 43 years later, after Goddard's first crude experiment, we landed on the moon. And if that doesn't give you a sense that anything is possible and how brilliant human beings are when we're at our best, and unfortunately we need competition, without the Russian space race, we probably might not be there yet. But that's really sort of caught on with people. And because, we are a nonprofit entity, there's really no ego involved. We want to really create a movement and spread the word and let people figure out how can they leverage, this really incredible opportunity in very cool ways. So that's been a fun mission where it's like, they don't have to know my name. They don't have to know about the Wonder Mission. They don't have to know where Worcester is. Most people can't pronounce it. It's the second biggest city in New England that no one can pronounce. Worcester comes to mind a lot. But if somehow we can create a spark that gets people to advance science, to encourage young scientists, young folks, and especially people to dream big. These are all big dreamers that we're talking about.
I am just mind blown with your passion. As you were talking, I could honestly see how deep this means to you and how you have such a big picture in mind for how this will look like in a little bit over like 2 years. So I mean, I'm blown away with your story. I mean, I think first off, a lot of individuals, a lot of students, including myself, did not know that or do not know that space is so interdisciplinary when they think, because one of the questions you were saying is, how can I make a career out of photography, out of art? And a lot of folks, even if they're interested in space, they're like, oh, I have to become an engineer, I have to become a physicist, but they don't realize how many other ways there are to combine the space industry with their own personal passions. And to just hear your story and what you're doing, and how this small idea became now such a big thing and hopefully will continue to gain more and more momentum in classrooms and throughout the world, throughout the country. I think your vision is incredible. And I'm sure as easy it was to explain your vision and what you hope to achieve, I'm sure the journey to get to where you are, even right now, has not been easy. So, have there been obstacles in your journey, whether it be with starting the Goddard Project or just in your career? And if so, how are you able to overcome these obstacles? Because a lot of times we talk about the successes, but not necessarily what it took to get over some of those hardships.
Sure. Well, I'm certainly brand new to the nonprofit world, so I've always, I've had some great opportunities. I've got to, work on some World's Fairs, some presidential libraries, some usually ambitious, very, very cool installations around the world. I got to produce the official videos for the Museum of Natural History and the Henry Ford
Wow.
Museum in Colonial Williamsburg. I got to do some great stuff, but it was always for a corporate entity. It really, and most of my work was more business to business. It really was somewhat disposable, when you think about it. So, just making that transition from fee for service to totally philanthropic,
Yeah.
still, that's sort of my biggest challenge because I'm such a newbie in it, but I've started to surround myself with, much smarter people than myself that are just beginning to fundraise, just beginning to um, have a presence on social media, which, look at my gray beard and my age, certainly isn't the most natural vehicle for me to communicate with. So I think just going into the nonprofit was sort of challenging, taking on all this responsibility and having the discipline to do it justice, certainly recognizing how ambitious this is and being able to really imagine that it's doable and how it could really happen. keeps me up at night, to a certain extent. And yet, as I start to meet people around the world, I keep asking people, "Can you talk me out of this? Am I out of my mind?" And I keep getting, this wonderful encouragement. The real the real moment where I knew I was in trouble, that I knew my passion had really, um, you know, taken taken over my life was in this impulsive purchase of saving Robert Goddard's house, where I am now. Um, so the Goddard house was actually willed to Clark University and WPI when Mrs. Goddard died in the 80s. And unfortunately, space certainly wasn't that sexy at the time necessarily. They basically deferred, and the house was auctioned off with all its contents and sold, as a rental property. And then about 2 years ago, I was reading a news feed and read that the house was back on the market, and both Clark and WPI were not interested in taking it over, and it was about to be sold, and all the land had already been sold next to it for a developer, and they're going to build ranch houses right on top of the Goddard property. And I had a couple extra scotches and went to sleep that night. And I woke up the next morning, and I'm not normally a impulsive person. And I just called up my realtor friend and said, "Tell me about the house." And he said, "Well, it's going to sell in the next 24 to 48 hours because at that point the real estate market was very hot. It was set up as the potential rental." And I basically said, "Buy it." So I ended up buying the house personally, and it took me about 6 months to track down the developer who basically, uh, had sold off all this land plots next to it. And a lot of the places where Robert Goddard had some really significant epiphanies and his famous cherry tree stories, which we have time, I'll rant on about, which is this really great inspirational story. So I really jumped in as an individual, purchased the house, and we're currently in the process of moving the house from my personal possession into the Wonder Mission nonprofit. And moving forward, eventually it shouldn't be owned by an individual. If this is the guy that really helped humanity get off the planet, and we're soon to become an interplanetary society, whether we like it or not. Mars is going to be, certainly in your future, if not mine, and beyond, that it would be a crime to let Goddard's house and legacy go. Goddard's wife, Esther Goddard, a lot of people don't recognize, really was very much his partner in his research and his day-to-day successes. She was his cinematographer. She typed up his notes every day. And actually, when he passed away early, she was the one that really fought for his legacy, organized all his papers and archives, and eventually won a $1 million patent lawsuit with NASA, because NASA was still using all of Goddard's patents without remuneration. So we're actually renaming the house the Robert and Esther Goddard House. And eventually we'll get it on the National Historic Register, and eventually we'll create some sort of a preservation trust for people to really, much smarter than I, really protect it for posterity, because it really is, it's pretty significant. I mean, in terms of how amazing space is, how big a part of our world space will be in the future. I mean, we always look over the next mountain, and we're not gonna stop. And and we've also found there's incredible financial opportunities and advantages in terms of space. And it's not just space tourism; it's remote sensing and climate data and defense and communications. And certainly and medicine. I mean, I just talked to yesterday a gentleman who's talking with a company that's basically talking about building factories in space to take space debris and repurpose it, and get rid of the space debris, space junk issue. And I mean, people thinking about this stuff, it's like, how can they even imagine this as a business model? And yet there's all these incredible people doing stuff. So but the Goddard House really kind of put me on the map, and kind of basically made me say, okay, now I'm pretty serious about this. But it has given the Wonder Mission really a seat at the table. So, I can walk into the Goddard Space Flight Center and just say hi to the receptionist and mention we saved Goddard's house. And the next thing you know, the director will come down and, want to chat and want to visit. And, I give him one of my Goddard pins, which we'll have to get you after the podcast for sure. So the challenges really are the ambition level is high, understanding my background skill levels, but I'm gradually finding a wonderful repertory group of people out there that are guiding me. We're just beginning to fundraise. Eventually, I'm sure we'll build a much more substantial team. But it's humbling, scary, and I got to say, I wake up in the middle of the night, almost every night, writing down a note or having another idea. And it's really given me a purpose in life and kind of gives me a zip in my step every day.
There are very few moments where I'm just like completely just in awe of a person. And today I have to say, like, you're one of the most inspiring individuals I've ever spoken to. And I genuinely mean that from my heart because there are very few individuals who are so passionate about something and take that conscious effort to do something themselves to create momentum. And I'm honestly surprised that there hasn't been even more national coverage on the Wonder Mission and what you're doing with this project. I mean, I think we will get there for sure. But I'm just saying, like, what you're doing in your story and the way you're speaking about it and what you've done, I'm just mind blown, and I'm positive that any person who listens to your story and has a chance to just learn about the work that you've been doing, and right now as a solo person with just collaborators around you, I mean, I think your passion and your drive really shows, and any obstacle that comes along this incredible mission that you have will definitely be overcome. So I think really, I have to say, I'm genuinely speechless, and I'm like, any way that I could help probably is not possible, but if I can, I 100% would love to, and I'm sure anyone who's listening would love to support in any minute way as well, whether it be just spreading the word or being able to start different programs at schools or companies or organizations to raise awareness about this mission is so critical. So again, I truly mean it when I say there are very few folks who are so passionate about something, but your passion really shines through, and I really appreciate what you're doing to preserve this history. We talk a lot about the future of space, the exciting future of sending humans to Mars or to advancing space technology and space medicine, but to think that wouldn't be possible really without these incredible giants who kind of set the foundation for this industry, and Goddard being one of the main pioneers of this industry. It's definitely a history that more students and more adults and this generation needs to know about.
Thank you. Yeah, he's a great role model. He was a sickly kid. He had tuberculosis. He didn't go to high school until he was 17 years old. But he read science fiction. I mean, he really was, he's really a true nerd. That's actually, there's if we have time, I don't know if you've heard the cherry tree story.
No, I haven't.
So great story. So, and Carl Sagan wrote an essay called Cherry Tree to Mars years later that kind of retells the story. But Goddard is just finished reading War of the Worlds. It was serialized in the local Worcester newspaper. And he had this favorite cherry tree on the property here at Maple Hill. And he was out one October evening and he was actually trimming some dead branches up high. He had a little ladder, an old no trespassing sign. He's 17 years old. And it's one of these beautifully clear October evenings. And he looks up and he can see Mars fairly bright and standing out. And he has this epiphany. And he says, wouldn't it be marvelous if we could build some device to take us to Mars and beyond? And he comes down from that tree and he writes in his journal, I have my life's mission. I'm a different boy. And each year he would celebrate that evening. I think it's October 16th. He would celebrate that as his anniversary day. And in years later, in 1938, the tree was destroyed by this terrible hurricane. And he writes in his journal, cherry tree destroyed by hurricane must go on alone. And so we're hoping actually to start planting cherry trees every year at his anniversary day. And then we're going to propagate the seeds and then distribute them to schools around the country so they can have their own Robert Goddard, cherry tree inspirational story. But it's just, one of many Goddard mythical stories that's just really terrific. And, Sagan writes that, there's no doubt that the Viking mission that he was promoting at that time wouldn't be possible without the dreams of this young boy in a cherry tree on a cold October day. So it's a really sweet story.
I mean, I haven't heard of that one, but I'm sure now it's going to be with me. And anytime I go speak with a school or anyone, I'm just be talking about, have you heard of the Goddard Cherry story? I think it's going to be something very inspiring for students to hold on to as they come up with their own, as you mentioned, their own like wonder missions of their life and figure out what they want to do. So really, thank you so much today, Charles, for taking your time to share this incredible story and also your work and your journey. I think you're a very inspiring space champion who is doing so much to not only preserve the history of space, but create this incredible future for future generations to just be creative and to use their passion to drive the missions that, become their purpose in life. And I'm so glad that you were able to find your purpose with what you're going to be doing with this Goddard project. And I'm excited for the centennial and to see how everything turns out in the next 2 years. So thank you again for taking your time to do this interview. I wish I could speak with you all day about this, but I can't wait to meet you in person at the Humans to Mars Summit and, and really talk about this again there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And please come and visit. And any of your listeners, if they have a passion for space science and Robert Goddard, I'd love to give them a personal tour if they want to make the trip up here. And look forward to seeing you in the spring. And thanks for the opportunity to share what we're up to.